Namaskar. The premise of a polity resides in its people, and yet there is more often than not a bid to encapsulate it, to codify it. The Indian Constitution arose from extensive consultations and deliberations, and yet there is scope for reforms in myriad ways. To discuss this and more, today we have with us Dr. M.R. Venkatesh. Dr. M.R. Venkatesh is a renowned advocate and economist, specializing in economic criminal law and anti-money laundering law. He has authored various books such as Retaining Balance, The Eternal Way, and is a respected panelist in leading primetime shows on national television in the country. He has been vocal on issues of corruption and the state of governance in India. I would like to welcome you to the Infinity Foundation, sir.
Thank you very much. Pleasure is mine.
So, sir, the Constitution is said to be the supreme law of the Indian Republic. You have been advocating for revisiting of the Indian Constitution. So which elements or aspects would you particularly and primarily like to revisit?
Okay, and this is a very fundamental question that I get confronted with. It is not that the cup of tea is lacking a teaspoon of sugar, that you have to add or delete something. To me, it looks to be a genetically flawed document. So my revisiting or revisitation should culminate in rewriting of the Constitution. De novo. We have to, of course, I don't say that we have to, there is nothing in this Constitution that needs to be taken up. No, I don't say those type of outlandish statements. I say that structurally there is a flaw. Why do I say this? Now, just as we were getting independence, there was this United Nations was getting formed, 1945-46. And Article 23 of the UN talks about this Security Council. And I think Article 27 talks about the 5 nations, which are the permanent members who have what is called as the veto right. And who are the 5 members? Britain, America, France, then you have Russia, then you have China. Britain in 1642, America in 1776, France in 1789, Russia in 1917, and China in 1949. All of them had revolutions. And barring China, all the other 4 are European powers. And the Chinese revolution is modeled again on the French and the Russian revolution. So you must understand the world or the power is basically Eurocentric. The definition of power, state, concept of United Nations, who has the right to veto, and all these flows from the Roman Empire, that the centrifugal and the centripetal forces, as they say, and the empire has got all the rights to civilize the barbarians. A phrase that was used repeatedly by the British. And a very long period of time, even after we got independence, that is one of the questions posed to the civil servants in India as to how British rule benefited India. And it took almost 78 years post-independence to come to a figure of around $45 trillion that is the loot by the British from India. So the long and short of it is, this idea that we have got about from the French Revolution or the American Revolution. And we got so carried away during the independence that we said, look at France, look at Germany, look at Italy, look at Ireland. We saw the world over, but we did not look inwards. And we borrowed, we the people, from the American Constitution. We borrowed liberty, fraternity, equality from the French, added justice to it in the preamble. I'm not saying these are not ignoble, these are ignoble thoughts. These are absolutely to be, you need to keep a distance. No, I'm not saying this. But till 1945-46, in fact, the Quit India Movement resolution talks about establishment of Ram Rajya. In fact, Ram Rajya was the clarion call given by Mahatma Gandhi. Right. They were talking about village republics, rightly or wrongly. But Ambedkar says that, village is a den of ignorance. Nehru foo-foos Mahatma Gandhi's idea about village republics. And we started borrowing from world over. and created a constitution that was basically done in a hurry. And I don't blame the founding fathers of the Indian Constitution, because they had two choices before them. One was to preserve an existing order. One was to indulge in further chaos. Already you had partition, you had so many other problems that was grappling or the nation was confronting. So they chose order to further chaos. And in that order, that the Constitution of India is primarily a rehash of the 1935 Government of India Act. So if you look at it from all aspects, that you find that you have borrowed from the French, you have borrowed from the Americans, and you don't even realize today, people like Os Guinness and others who are writing books after books and trying to figure out that how the American Revolution is distinct from the French Revolution. All revolutions is to create a state. All revolution is to give liberty. All revolution is to give freedom to the people. Okay, the French give fraternity, equality, and liberty. But liberty is the least of their problems. Whereas Americans' revolution is for liberty, the individual liberty. Right. They look at state as some sort of an intruder in personal liberty, even today. But whereas the French look at the state for social justice. Now, if you have borrowed we the people from the American Constitution, and if you have borrowed fraternity, fraternity, equality, and liberty from the French, are you for social justice or are you for equality? So there are so many multiple questions. So that is why at every stage we are in sort of a confusion. And that confusion manifests itself in Article 1 of the Constitution. It says, Bharat, India, that is Bharat. No other country has two names. Rajesh alias Raju. No, this type of things don't happen in any other country. We wanted to cognize our civilization past. But we also said that we will start from a clean slate. And ended up in between the two, neither here nor there. So there's too much of confusion in the Constitution, and that we need to address, and that will bring about the fundamental question is, who are we? Bharatiyas or Indians? Are we supposed to be having a civilizational connect with our past? If so, how does the state should help us? And if not, let us all agree and say that, yes, let us disconnect ourselves with the past and start with the case state. And your opening remark that we had wide-ranging consultation or words to that effect when the Constitution was being framed, I would beg to disagree, because 299 people ended up with the Constituent Assembly. Right. And of which 60-70 people died or probably did not participate, or actually once Pakistan was formed, they also refused to participate. So hardly 200-220 people were the people who finally ended up in the Constituent Assembly. For at that time we had a population of 350 million now, which would be corresponding to modern American population. Now, if 220 people in America decide and come about with certain things, today's standards, would America accept it? Would the modern world accept it? So we need, sheerly for the scope, the dimensions, for the areas that we have missed, the areas that we borrowed, all these things make the Constitution a genetically flawed one. So I want to revisit it de novo.
Yes. And I think that idea of proportionality and the idea of contradictions that you have beautifully put forth in your response, I think that is very, very important, because that also comes from the other revolutions that happened in the past. For instance, even the English, the so-called revolution or the Civil War that happened, and subsequently mentioned about the French Revolution and various others. And it was a patchwork which, at times needs to be looked at very closely, because it does have a very big impact on the lives of the people and the way in which the state is evolving, and we as a people are, moving forward. There is another point that you raise in some of your writings, and you've spoken on before, and which relates to the idea of, the beauty of the Indian civilization being in decentralization, right? And the onus of civilization strides being not on some proverbial monolith or an ombudsman, science and culture being expressed in temples, for instance, social and cultural capital being so central to the Indian way of life. And yet, post-independence, the role of the state has been front and center too much in certain instances and over certain periods. So how can we align ourselves with our civilization ethos on this when it comes to economics, politics, and society?
Article 12 of the Constitution talks about the state without defining what it should do, and more importantly, without telling us what it should not do. So we have conjured a state which is omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient. So a state can probably take any avatar and come into your bedroom and say what you should do and what you should not do. Right. And dictate terms and probably prosecute you, penalize you. It could do anything. Now, is this the state that we want? This type of state probably suits the French, but definitely not the Americans. The Americans would be aghast, and I'm sure we would be aghast. Now, but even by the American standard, which is a lower standard as far as the French are concerned, the power of the state. To me, I would say that there is this assumption that all these idea of state, all these idea of European, what we call as the European civilization or the Western civilization, which have brought about the idea of state in the modern context, flows from the thoughts of Thomas Hobbes and others, who have held that man primarily is a person who is of a beastly nature. They don't trust humans. And this, I would say, comes from the Christian thought that every man is a born sinner. And hence, and in Christianity, you can't, however pious you may be, however good you may be, unless you are redeemed by an external force, which is Christ, you cannot attain salvation. And ditto in politics. And in fact, there is a book, I forgot the name of the book, which I have referred to in my Retaining Balance, where they have brought about this issue, where the author has brought about this issue very significantly. He says any Western idea is, whether it is Sigmund Freud, Richard Dawkins, Thomas Hobbes, or Adam Smith in their respective fields, or even Karl Marx, they have always believed that an external impressed force is what will correct the humans. Whereas in our civilization, it is always the self, elevating the self. In fact, the original name of Mahabharata is, it goes by the name of Jaya. Then Jaya. Jaya means victory over self. Vijaya is victory over others. Jaya is the original name given to Mahabharata, wherein you fight your own demons in your mind and win your own battle. That is the greatest battle. So it is self versus an external force. These are two civilizational contrasts in a very abstract terms. Now you create a state, and that is why your question is very alluring, because you are asking what should be the role of the state. Now, an omnipotent state may suit the Russians. An omnipresent state may suit the Chinese. But it definitely does not suit us. So we require, and Ram Rajya was Rajya where there was no Ram. Our idea of Ram Rajya is less of Ram, more of Rajya, where the governance happens because of our own self-discipline, of our own responsibilities, of our own duties. So these are things that, for instance, when the American Constitution was being written, Madison and others went to extraordinary depths to look into classical antiquity, which was, and they adopted the Greco-Roman writings as if it was a part of the American one.
Right.
Whereas we did not look at, say, Shanti Parva.
Yes.
We did not look at Ram Rajya. In fact, we consciously avoided everything right from 1945 or 46. Until such time, the clarion call was only all these things, a reference to the classical Indian antiquity. Whereas post 47, suddenly we took a U-turn, and I would put it in a very colorful term as we unformatted the hard disk, and we said we are no longer connected with our past, and we would try draw a new nation state which would have nothing to do with the past. Now that could possibly even the Americans, it could have been possible with the Americans. The Americans did not do it. The Americans did not do it because they somehow conjured ways and means of trying to own up certain civilizations which are not part of theirs. But there is our own civilization we gave up. So then, to answer your question in summary, is that yes, we require a state, but that state is not the state of what we call under Article 12. We require a residuary state, and we should allow the self to elevate. And that would be in resonance to the civilizational values and ethos.
And I think the current government, with its emphasis on Atmanirbharta, on the emphasis on more governance, less government, is kind of making strides in that direction. Another aspect that the current government has been looking at is in terms of the mercantile, in terms of profits, growth. Nehru once told J.R.D. Tata, "Never talk to me about the word profit. It is a dirty word." Thereafter, Tata's Air India and the insurance outfit were nationalized. Of course, we know about that. Birla had to cease his plans to set up a steel plant in Durgapur because Nehru thought that was a public works job. So how do we move beyond the vestigial Nehruvian socialism that still remains in India's economic governance and thinking?
If Nehru did not like the word profits, the Mahatma did not like the word technology.
Right.
So the founding fathers of the modern Indian state, one did not like profits, one did not like technology. And Gandhiji never had problems with profits. And Nehru did not have problem with technology. He wanted all modern technology, but he wanted only loss making, private sector to make losses. Gandhiji wanted all profits, but he only wanted it with the charka. So this gives a very, very peculiar situation where both Nehru and Gandhi did not choose the right path. Now this, as somebody like Gurumurtiji always says, was to a civilization which venerated goddess Lakshmi. Now, where else do you find a goddess of wealth and venerated so very highly? We do Lakshmi Puja every year during Diwali and whatnot. That is the civilization I mentioned. But being prosperous was our forte or our strength. We were great traders, we were great manufacturers. We went to distant land and conquered on trade and commerce. We did not, probably it is often said, we didn't send our armies, but our trading community, the Vaisyas, were all over the place, and they were trading with gumption and winning world over. And they were giving the best of our manufactured product, which was available. You don't trade only being a Dubai or Singapore can be a pass-through port, but India was not a pass-through port; it was a manufacturing hub. And Angus Madison and others have proved that India had something close to 25 to 35% share in the global GDP from the beginning of the Common Era till say the British landed here. So we had a huge civilizational connect with prosperity. We had a huge connection with manufacturing. We had a huge connection with venerating wealth. But on December 13th, 1946, it's a Friday, and it is 13th the Friday. So you can understand, I have a phobia of Friday the 13th. Right. Because Nehru moves in the Constituent Assembly debate the aims and objectives of the Constitution. That is the resolution he puts forward. And in that, though the word socialism, he puts in 8 points. The word socialism does not figure in that. But during the speech, when he is introducing the resolution, Nehru says, I believe in socialism. And not only he says, I believe in socialism, he says, I want the world to be of a socialist order. And somewhere down the line, that intellectual arrogance that I can mold and modify society, which is the bane of all leftists. that I will somehow or the other have my own ideas thrust on you, which is basically an imperialistic idea, a superiority complex. And this comes from the Christian world. The Christian world believes that it has found the ultimate religion, and Rome or America, the modern day America, which mirrors Rome, has the same idea that, look, I know what is best for you and I will give you the prescription. And socialism was one such prescription thrust by Nehru on us. And an unsuspecting country, a nation, gullibly swallowed what Nehru offered and dished out. This, I think, is something that we need to reverse. So this could be the next biggest, I said the genetically flawed constitution. This is one DNA of the constitution, the chromosome, which I think has crept in when it was never thought about. Despite the fact, I think on November 15th, 1948, if my dates are correct, Ambedkar makes a very serious charge on Nehru and says that you and I cannot decide on the economic policy for the future. But despite it, Nehru goes ahead and, Ambedkar dies, and it's free for all for Nehru after 50s. And then by 55, he brings in the Avadi resolution. He not only wants a socialist order within the government, he wants a socialist order within the society. He conjures up various images till the Chinese came and gave him a whack on his back, and he came to his senses in 62. And then it was all downhill for him. By the time he could not revive himself, much less revive the country. So, and Indira Gandhi was more Nehru than Nehru himself. And then there was a downward slide till we reached 1991, till we touched the bottom, and we had to again start building brick by brick. So the long and short of it is, socialism is something that we need to jettison, and that's one point that we need to revisit in the constitution. Because whenever I stand in the court as a lawyer, the image of the state in the minds of the judiciary is, this is a welfare state. The state is not there to do welfare. The state can do welfare, but it cannot be a welfare state, which are two different things. So you have a state government like Tamil Nadu distributing TVs, freebies. Now you have all sorts of things coming in without even, recklessly borrowing from our future generation to pay for these freebies. So these type of things is what we need to debate.
Right. Absolutely. And I think it's a very interesting point that you mentioned, because particularly in the context of set of proposals which came out in 1944-45, which is the title, I think, is a brief memorandum outlining a plan of economic development for India. The short version is the Bombay Plan, which was put forth by eminent industrialists like J.R.D. Tata and Ghanshyam Das Birla, which placed emphasis on import substitution and industrialization. It also touched upon some of the aspects of welfare schemes in a rather comprehensive and nuanced manner. So do you think that we missed the bus somewhere when we went past that and went with this Nehruvian bandwagon, so to say? And how can we move ahead from here? You already mentioned a little bit about the overemphasis on socialism, but this balance of well, in a manner of speaking, being compassionate to the citizens of the country, looking at their welfare, and yet not going into this overemphasis on protectionism, into this overemphasis on the state-heavy kind of economics that we have been seeing, towards a more comprehensive framework.
See, we have yet to figure out the sweet spot, the balance between welfareism and what I would say that the free functioning of the markets. It's a very delicate balance. The sweet spot exists, but it exists in a very narrow compass. And it is very difficult to find out. And because you have to understand, if you slip out a bit, either ways, democracy is so ruthless that you lose elections. And if you try to do too much of balancing the other way around, if you overbalance, you find that the growth is badly hit. So we are as a nation, we have not yet reconciled ourselves to certain fundamentals. And one of the fundamentals is what the state should do and what it should not do. Now, can you believe that we are now, the courts are discussing whether marital rape is an offense or not in India? Now, these are issues where you will have, then there will be a law, and then you step in and say what type of evidences has to be produced. Now, why does the court get into this? Because the state is not yet defined. The powers of the state are not defined. If the state says, I will not step into certain things, and this after Supreme Court in Puttaswamy has held privacy to be a fundamental right. A fundamental. Now, when a husband and wife get into a problem, that would be a problem. It's in the bedroom. I'm not saying there are no problems between the husband and the wife in the bedroom. But should the state step in? Should the state step in to arbitrate in that type of situation? This is the question. Now, these are the things that we don't discuss. And these are things that are still not yet defined, and that you will find repeatedly getting several stalwarts in the Constituent Assembly repeatedly pointing out that we are moving away from dharma. There is nothing called dharma in this constitution. There is no reference to classical antiquity. So everywhere you will find that there is a disconnect. And when it comes to industrialization, we thought that when India becomes prosperous or India becomes industrialized, Nehru was so chary about profits, as you rightly pointed out, that he would not allow businessmen to make profits. And his daughter went one step ahead. That you had FERA, you had MRTP, you had income tax law, you had wealth tax, you had gift tax, you had COFE POSA, a series of legislations wherein nobody could even believe that he could be rich by working within the four corners of law. If you look into the 60s and 70s Bollywood movies, you would find the rich man invariably being a smuggler whose daughter will be wooed by the chief protagonist, the hero. And there was no possibility of him becoming rich without breaking the law. So if you create a mentality that I have to see to that my citizens are kept in poverty, so that I will give freebies and I will be the Santa Claus during election time, distributing goodies here and there. And democracy lends itself to this type of nonsense. And unless we put an end to it in a very calibrated, I'm not saying all welfare should be stopped, but welfare plus democracy makes it a whiskey and a lassi combination, which is a very dangerous cocktail that you can consume neither. And it is dynamiting us from within. So we need to go back and see as to what could be the welfare contours of a state. Now, if a state gives some sort of grains or help somebody during flood, earthquake, natural calamity, understandable. But that must be for a limited period. Now, when you tax at 80%, 90%, and of course, today we have woken up and we have reduced our taxes. But I still feel that even the Modi government has to, use the headroom, the fiscal headroom, and reduce further taxes, both indirect and direct. I'm not only talking about direct taxes, both direct and indirect. And when it reduces it, it also has to reduce its own role. And once it reduces its role, its expenditure comes down. And once that is done, you automatically see that the people of the country will have to somehow or the other find ways of earning their bread. Right. Nowadays, in fact, you will be shocked. You will be shocked, Mrittunjoy, when I say this. Luckily, during the pandemic, we had the facility of watching various courts functioning in India. And one of the lordships in one of the courts said, if a person were to be supinely indifferent to himself and count stars day in and out, it will be the duty of the state to provide him 3 square meals a day.
Wow, right.
Now, I don't blame again the lordships, because their idea is they don't understand economics. They don't understand where from the money comes in. They believe that the money can be printed. And the government is stingy by not printing notes. So this is what is the state of affairs in our judiciary, which is the smaller order of spawns. But the larger one is we have spawned a state in our minds that if tomorrow my toilet doesn't work, I have somebody, I have to file a writ and somebody will come in and do it. If there is no water in the taps, somebody will step in. No, we have conjured an image of a state which is there at every step. And then the state creates excesses. And obviously it will. Then we start talking about fundamental rights, our individual liberties being taken away.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the things. I mean, so, and there's an interesting interface between, again, going back to decentralization, ethos and values, because I remember you once wrote on how Indians, interestingly, have achieved higher savings rate post-liberalization, which is a kind of a theoretical contradiction. And this was due to an age-old emphasis on, savings, which underlie the historical resilience of economics of the Indian people, as was observed, I think, in the 2017 report of the Household Finance Committee of the RBI. And one of the observations being that the future evidence that traditional and cultural factors are strong determinants of observed allocations. And there was a low investment in high-risk instruments, with share of investment in high-risk bonds being about 3%. And so how do you see the state and future of balance of this consumerism and savings? And more importantly, there are certain integral and inherent Indian values and ethos, which we as a people have carried forward over the ages when it comes to economics, when it comes to finances, and how can that inform our national, our people's kind of economics and finances going forward?
See, that is what a state has to do. We have a Ministry of Culture,
right.
And the Ministry of Culture is what we are. Civilization is what we were.
Mm-hmm.
Put it very differently. And actually, we require a Ministry of Civilization, not a Ministry of Culture. And Ministry of Culture believes that it has to put in some archaeological survey of India in certain places and monitor it and nothing more.
Yeah.
We need to figure out how much of our culture is fashioning our economics. And in my view, as I wrote in Retaining Balance, it's a substantial part of our economics is fashioned by our culture, of our ethos, of our upbringings, of our traditional family values. People save in substantial amount. And what is that the government does? The government borrows vast amount of money from household saving and says that it is running the government under a fiscal deficit. And I have no issues with the fiscal deficit. I have problems with the revenue deficit. Revenue deficit is something that you don't even put the money even for earning the revenue income. The revenues and the expenses don't even match. And since there is a deficit, and you pump in more money on to run the government. In other words, government running every day is a loss, technically speaking, if I have to put it in a very crude language. But government cannot, unlike Nehru, who looks at profit and loss at every damn thing, we can't be looking at it. So we sustain this. But who sustains the government? It is the household savings that gives money to the banks, and banks in turn lend money to the government. This is how Indian economy is being, at a very macro level, being funded. But does the government ever recognize that there is a huge family which saves? There are something around 260 million family households in India, roughly. And they are the people who are saving and saving big time. And they are putting money into your stock market, into the corporates, into the banks. And in turn, all this money comes to the government. Now, if this realization is there, now if you go back and look at the income tax, the 1961 Act, which has been amended more than 8,000 times, I have lost count of it, how many times it has been amended in the last 60 years, which has an uncanny resemblance to the 1922 Income Tax Act, which has an uncanny resemblance to the British Income Tax Act. The British may have a different reason for taxation, the Income Tax Act. Yeah. But do we have to have the same taxation principles? Now, I think it was November 17, 1948, Nandini Ranjan Sarkar committee was formed to look into the taxation. Right. They came with a report within 20 days, probably by 5th or 6th of December, 1948. And they said the state will have the powers to tax. Article 265 was drafted, and no tax will be levied without the force of law. And they picked up, cherry-picked everything from the 1935 Act, So what would be taxed by the state, what would be taxed by the center was only the bifurcation. Now, why should you tax? How much should you tax? Why should you not tax certain things? Was never debated. Now, all that was done was the state has a right to tax, so it will tax itself to glory. So we never decided. I'm taking a very because tax is the umbilical cord between the citizenry and the state. Now, if that is not properly established, why should I pay 30% tax? Why not 60%? Why not 10%? Now, these are things that you have to determine after determining the role of the state. You can't keep it so flexible that you will, in fact, at one point of time in the 70s, old-time chartered accountants are never shy of pointing this out. At some point of time, along with the wealth tax, the rate of tax exceeded 104%.
Oh, right.
Okay. So, beyond 2 lakh rupees income.
Right.
Okay. Of course, we have come down fairly away from that type of nonsense. But even today, if somebody wants you to tax at 60%, nothing that the Constitution prevents somebody from taxing you at 60%, 70%. So all that is because we have not decided what should be the design of the state.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
if that is determined, the rest will follow.
Right. And that brings again us back to the point of expenditure as well, and where the private public partnerships or the private expenditure, public expenditure, and also of course corporate governance, which is another debate altogether. So how do you see us moving forward in terms of the existing laws and frameworks when it comes to facilitation of more kind of collaboration between the private entities, the government itself, and the governance thereof in terms of the policy that we require and the general thinking, the vision that we require going forward?
See, I would put it this way, and it is something like this, that the bureaucracy in India believes that it has taken a contract of all that is right and wrong within India. And I humorously put it to my friends in the government that there is a new Varnashrama in government. Okay, what is that? The IAS screws the rich. The IRS has taken on itself to screw the middle class. The IPS screws the lower class. Now, a middle class guy, would not be afraid of the IPS officer, because he knows that this guy would have some contacts, so he would behave with me decently. But I can get screwed by the income tax officer by sending me a notice and say 6 years ka notice de diya hai, bring all the details, this, that. Then I will be spending my next 6 years to wriggle out of the mess.
Yeah.
But the corporate honchos, the Tatas, the Birlas, Ambanis, Adanis, they are scared about secretary power, secretary railway, secretary this, because one policy, comma here or a full stop there that they change can mean something totally different for them. The point I'm laboring on is the state still feels that its citizens are not to be trusted, not to be encouraged. Now, if there is somebody who has a problem, now let us assume during COVID, several corporates had problems in gathering revenue. They fell into the NPA trap. Now, of course, there was omnibus clauses and other things, but that would be specific. There were, this 20 trillion rupee packages and other things. But there was nothing that they have handled the businesses like what MITI does in, say, Japan. Now, why have you ever seen even the state government? State governments are worse. State government believes that every project you put in this state, you require 3%, 5%, depends on the party and depends on the chief minister. So there is an anti-business bias. And because of which there is an anti-prosperity bias in the country. Now, how do we settle this? Now, one way of settling it is that many of these laws, many of these what I call as statutes that we have framed in the last 30-40 years, by and large are only adversarial in nature.
Right.
They are not cooperative. The reason why they are not cooperative is the state does not trust the citizen does not trust the state. Now, if I have a problem in my accounts for the last, say, 2 years, I'm not able to show profits because of certain things, and I'm a listed company, perforce I am compelled to fudge my accounts rather than get handheld by the government for certain things.
Mm.
Now, on one hand, we say we are a welfare state. On one hand, we say we want the state to come into our bedrooms. But suddenly we also say, no, we believe in market forces. If you have done certain things, you please handle it all by yourself. In other words, we are not clear as to what we want to do with our laws and how much do we trust our citizens. And till we get into that equation, that equation between citizens and the state being formulated in the right earnest, I think this question will be a challenge to us.
Yes, absolutely. Besides the term socialist, secular is another term that was added to the preamble of the Indian Constitution by the 42nd Amendment in 1976. And yet we live in times when abusing Hindu gods and goddesses by celebrities such as Sayoni Ghosh is normalized with election tickets by a major political party like the Trinamool Congress, while quoting or speaking of them is regarded as problematic. So what kind of secularism are we talking of, and how do we move past this crass doublespeak?
Mrittunjoy, you will remember I spoke of December 13th, 1946. It was Friday.
Yes.
Where the aims and objectives resolution was passed by Nehru. And I pointed out socialism didn't figure in that 8 points. But I think the 4th or the 5th point was, believe it or not, there will be adequate safeguards for the minorities. Now, this is December 1946, when Pakistan was not yet even formed. There was not even, though Jinnah had talked about it and talked about that we will be a separate nation and other things. Two-nation theory was still, I would say, in an embryonic stage. I wouldn't say it was non-existent. I would say it was in an embryonic stage. Yes. But even at that time, Nehru had envisioned that there will be a minority in this country and we need to protect the minorities. Right. And let me tell you, Article 25 onwards till 31 is an absolute disaster. And the day we thought that protection of minorities is of paramount importance, and we don't give them actually protection, and the protection offered to the minorities is to abuse the majority. This is a very perverse protection that we give to the minorities, that we will abuse the Hindus, we will call Ma Durga anything, and in 70s, at least your state did not have that ignominy, my state has that Ramchandra Murthy and Ganesh Bhagwan's murtis were all adorned with garland of slippers. That is the level to which we had plummeted. And this is a land of great philosophies. This is the land of great spirituality. Now, my way of prayer and your way of prayer may be entirely different. Our words are not tolerate. Ours is acceptance. I shudder to use the word tolerance because tolerance is condescending in more ways than one. That I tolerate you because I have to some or other breathe to you. But acceptance is acceptance in toto. I love you, I adore you, though I may not be you, but I accept you. Ours is acceptance. Now, this unfortunately was given a short shrift as early as 13th December 1946, within the first few days of the Constitution. Yes. Of course, secularism was smuggled into the Constitution in 1975, as you rightly pointed out, during emergency. 42nd Amendment brought in the words secularism. And I think both socialism and secularism have killed more number of Indians than any amount of invasion by any foreign armies or any amount of pandemics in India. We have killed ourselves. We have shot ourselves in the foot. We have lost our civilizational connect to the past, and we have elevated secularism to a state religion. India doesn't have a state religion officially, but secularism has become the state religion. And we have shot ourselves in the foot by using these two words. And these two words have no meaning or relevance in Indian context. And both these things must be dropped. And this is yet again a reason why the constitution has to be revisited.
Speaking of Baba Sahib, he was a strong supporter of the Uniform Civil Code, and yet more than 70 years later, we are unable to incorporate the relevant understanding of nuances of Indian society to establish one. What are your thoughts on the same?
See, my view is that first thing, nobody has seen what a Uniform Civil Code looks like. It is like six blind men looking at the elephant and each one describing it. Till a document is released by the government and say this is the draft code, I cannot answer it in vacuum.
Right.
Second, I am deeply suspicious that any document from any government will inherently be biased against the Hindus.
Mm-hmm.
That is my suspicion. I hope and pray that I'm proved wrong. But I have a deep suspicion given the track record of the government of India of the last 70 years. The third point, uniformity is basically a Christian concept. In fact, before this program, I was reading a book which talked about Romanization of the world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and since then, many of this uniform ideas comes from Romanization, which is nothing but globalization. The modern globalization has its roots in the Romanization. Now, when we talk about unity, when we talk about Uniform Civil Code, there are several contours to it, which even the Hindu society, much less leave alone the Muslim Sikh or the Christian Jain or any other Samuday, leave them aside. Even the Hindus will find it difficult to box themselves into a particular code. Right. Unless the code is so flexible. And till such time I read it out, and I have gone through some of these suggestions also. People make it. But when you ask them what if, for instance, I tell you, we marry in South, cousins, Bua's daughter or uncle's daughters, they get married within the family. But this is not a practice which I find it in the northern part of the country. Right. Okay, northern part of the country, cousins getting married is very rare. Now, do you accept this as a code or do you reject it as a code?
Right.
These are challenges even within the Hindu community. So unless we see something very concrete, and I have so many questions, I don't have an answer, frankly. So on this, I would rather say that let me wait and see what it could ideally be. It may be an ideal destination point, but unfortunately, sometimes the destinations are kept as destination points rather than achieving them. It is best left to a future date because we don't know what it would actually bring about.
Right. Absolutely. Another point which has been of relevance and of interest is that of conversion, especially because there have been many malified, many under the surface means of misleading people in villages, in various tribal areas, for instance, by different groups, evangelical groups. And there has been a thrust for anti-conversion laws, for ways to protect people against such things from happening. So I would like to know from you, what are your thoughts on the same, and whether one could kind of move forward in this direction? How can we provide that protection to the people?
Some states have it.
Right.
And some states like Tamil Nadu, Jayalalitha tried it in 2004 and 2002 or 2003, and she had a spectacular failure in 2004, electoral defeat.
Right.
And one of the reasons attributed to such electoral defeat was that she was having an alliance with BJP, And 2, that she brought in anti-conversion law. 3, that she broke the back of the government employees who were on a strike. So she was taking on both socialism and secularism in one go, the modern day secularism and the modern day socialism. And she had to bite a, it was absolute bad thrashing. And Vajpayee also, as a result, Vajpayee also lost the elections. Now, coming back to this question about anti-conversion law, when you have a freedom to profess, and if conversion is an integral part of my religion, and you allow me under the constitution to do such activities, evangelical activities, and you also say you can even convert by force, you can convert by allurement, you can convert by coercion, you can convert by whatever means. That part of it, if at all, can be taken under IPC. Suppose you threaten me to convert by a point of a gun and I get converted. At best, I can take an action on you for pointing a gun, not for converting me. And these conversion law are not yet tested under any serious court. And these laws have been running, but they lack the teeth also. Let us be very clear. States which have actually brought in these laws, they are more than just ornamental pieces of legislation. They are not actually put in practice. Now, I have not seen a state which says I have taken action on somebody because they have violated this conversion law. And this has not come under the challenge of a constitutional court, a high court or a Supreme Court. Tested under Article 25-26, the right to profess religion, and say that conversion is an integral part of both Abrahamic faiths, and hence are intravires the constitution and not ultravires the constitution. This entire range has not happened. And if you want to put an end to conversion, laws are not adequate, because there will be a conflict between the law and the constitution, and any student of law will tell you whenever there is a conflict between the state legislation and the constitution will prevail. So we need the constitutional amendment and Article 25-26. That is why I believe that one of the reasons why we need to revisit the constitution is that the Hindu civilization must be protected. This is a unique civilization, and it is not merely to say that this is a heritage value. This is a functional civilization, and it needs to be protected because others are a force that they are putting it under constant attack. It is under constant threat. And there are indigenous societies which comes under the large umbrella of word called Hinduism. There are tribals, there are people who have unique faiths, unique customs. For instance, your part of the country, marriages are held at 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., whereas we do it very early in the morning, after sunrise. So everything is unique. But broadly, they may come under the definition of Hinduism. But each one has to be protected. But if each one is under an attack day in and day out, I think it is incumbent on the state to step in and see this as a threat to the civilizational ethos of this country and protect it not through enactment of laws at the state level. This must be a central intervention is required. The central government has to intervene, and for which we require a constitutional amendment. What contours of it is probably for scholars to debate it further and lawyers to put it in writing. But the existing infrastructure and framework does not lend confidence to the fact that we'll be fighting conversions big time. Of course, this government has done something spectacular. I must also say this in the same breath, that they have taken a war on this NGOs through the FCRA.
Yes.
FCRA was basically used as a route to evangelical activities and illegal conversions. I think that they have put an end, but more has to be done. Several steps have to be taken. One of them should be a constitutional amendment, which says that you cannot convert anybody. Okay, that may be integral to your faith, but you cannot convert anybody by allurement. If somebody wants to convert by himself, but that must be a very strictly enacted constitutional amendment.
Another point which has been of debate lately, of course, and for a while has been that of reservation and positive affirmation. Recently, there has been a debate going on in the US Supreme Court, which relates to Harvard University, where the idea of positive affirmation and quotas for students from ethnic minority backgrounds has been challenged. It has been a debate that has been ongoing, and potentially Harvard University may not pull through in that particular case. And in India, of course, we have had this ongoing debate about how we should comprehensively think about reservation, what socio-economic aspects can be taken into consideration for that. So what are your thoughts on that, and how can we move forward on that front?
See, reservation is a very touchy issue in India.
Yes.
And it is politically incorrect for any political party, given the fact that today OBC's vote share ranges anywhere between 20 to 60% in various states. And it could be the lowest in Kerala because the Hindu population itself is very low. Okay. So given that type of situation, I don't think that we are going to do away with the reservation in the foreseeable future. And there is no scholarly approach, even in amongst academicians, to say, let us look at a study on the positive impact of reservation.
Right.
At least 3 generations have taken reservation. Let us see how much it has impacted the society. And yeah, any scheme will have its own downsides. Let us do a balance and find out if the benefits outweigh the negatives. Right. Unfortunately, no university in India, no scholar, not any government or private universities have come forward with a study which itself shows to what extent we want to close our eyes to this scourge of reservations. Now, if you ask me, reservation, should it be banned? Yes, it should be banned. Ideally, yes. But the consequence of that would be so bad on the current political scenario that even probably Modi may find it difficult to even win 2024, which today at this point in time, everybody says it's a given. But so it would be advisable that there can be probably a study, there can be, in India, everything has to move from the bottom. It cannot be a top-down approach. It cannot be that you and I want it or don't want it. Right. Ideally, there must be a study. Now, let us do a honest study about this. Yes. See if there could be some scholar coming out with a presentation as to whether large sections of the communities are benefited, or is it again in a narrow silo, of the community, some portion of it have only done it, whether we can tweak the creamy layer part of it. All these things can be probably looked into. And then probably we can think whether reservation has to continue. Reservation today is basically a political issue. It has nothing to do with economics.
Right.
And it is basically to ensure that the next elections are not fought on reservation and de-reservation. Right. It is fought on something else. So this issue is kept as a moribund issue. It is kept in the freezer. Nobody wants to pull it out of the locker. And in my view also, rightfully today, we cannot afford this chaos.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. I still remember when Lalu Prasad, I think, was gave that statement that we get rid of reservation and the next day you'll be losing the elections. I think it was to the Sangh. He was mentioning about that a while back. Another topic which is of interest to Hindus in particular, and which Subramaniam Swamy has been talking of at length, is that of the nationalization of temples. And temples have been at the center of Hindu spirituality and culture. In the Indian Constitution, Article 31A(1)(b), speaks of taking over of the management of any property by the state for a limited period, either in the public interest or in order to secure the proper management of that particular property. But what we see is a much more widespread problem than a selective acquisition. And Hindus have benefited over the ages from the decoupling of the spiritual and the political. So how in this particular issue, do you think we can move forward in contemporary times?
See, temple administration doesn't bother much of North Indians because thanks to the Muhammad Ghaznis and the Ghoris and the Aurangzeb, much of the temples have been razed to the ground. South of India, we have huge number of temples. And I'm told there is around 40,000 temples in the state of Tamil Nadu, which is administered by the HR and CA department. That's humongous, 40,000 temples, and each one, and could be 1,000, several of them could be 1,500 years old. These are all heritage sites. These are all spiritual power centers or Shakti Peeths or has like Madurai temple and all. You can't measure it by any yardstick known to mankind. So Madurai, Tirupati, all these are our pride. And unfortunately, these are all given to executive officers and the government hierarchy, and where huge amount of loot is going on. The loot, in fact, I appeared for Mr. T.R. Ramesh, and one of the GO was to convert temple lands into lands for the poor. In the sense, illegal occupants could be regularized through this GO. And believe it or not, it is around 100,000 acres of land in possession of temples, which according to some people could be 100 lakh crores. The type of money that they talk about is 1 lakh crores or 100 lakh crores. There's a sum of money that they were talking about is humongous. Right. Now, the point I'm trying to emphasize is this pits the temples against what the state should do because it is duty bound to do because it's a welfare state. Now, a welfare state thinks that it can rob Peter and pay Paul. Never mind if Peter is Lord Rama himself, that it can put the hands into Rama's shirt, take out the currency notes and pay Peter, pay Paul. Now, the point here is very simple. What Dr. Swami says is one half of the problem. Temples must be nationalized. Then do you mean to say joint secretary should be sitting on every temple and administrating? Should the state look into it? The better way would be to hand it over to trustees, which is what HR and CE Act in its original avatar talked about. Right. Hand it over to local communities, local people, identify and leave it to the local people to administer and ensure that the Prevention of Corruption Act is extended to those trustees, and those trustees shall be deemed to be public servants insofar as Prevention of Corruption Act is concerned. Probably we need to strike a via media, say that state will not interfere. Nationalization of temples is maybe a possibility for Mathura and Gyanavapi Mosque or the Gyanavapi temple. But to say that my Madurai temple or Tirupati temple should come under the same formula is something that I am not agreeable. In the sense, my problem sitting from the southern part of the country is slightly different from those in the northern part. For instance, I will tell you, in the northern part, people say that the Places of Worship Act should be removed. It is a challenge and an affront to the civilization. But we here have argued that the Places of Worship Act protects me from maintaining my temple in the same way as of 15th of August 1947, because the temple existed. In the north, the temple did not exist. So you find that the Places of Worship Act itself is a challenge. Whereas for me, it is a protection. So India is a very peculiar country. You cannot have one size fit all. So what Dr. Swami says may fit in upwards of Vindhyas, but downwards of Vindhyas. And I would say that probably he needs to have a rethink on this.
Right. You recently retorted to Sanjay Jha, who's very, very active, is a word for it, claimed that 2014 to 2024 would be India's lost and dark decade by calling it India's best. What do you see as the major points of interest that we as a people need to focus on in the days ahead to help Bharat become the Vishwa Guru that it has always been in the days past?
See, the traditional Indian respect for knowledge has to come in. We were a civilization which prided itself on knowledge. And through knowledge, we earned our prosperity. Through prosperity, we did our charity and kept away poverty. We did not celebrate poverty. India was never poor historically till the last 2 centuries. The re-emergence of India, in my considered opinion, would be from respecting knowledge. And that is easier said than done, because what I find as a big challenge today in India is that we don't have international standards of universities and colleges.
Yes.
That where I don't mind people going to Microsoft or Google for employment. But I do mind if people go to Georgetown and Yale and Harvard for their education. That if we start doing it for the next 10 years and champion that, Madras University has done a study on, say, reservation impact.
Right.
And that is seen as some sort of a benchmark that is quoted in the US cases as to how reservation works or doesn't work, and is quoted by Harvard to support its point, or by the opponents to say that this doesn't work in a country like India where it has endured it for 70 years. Madras University would be doing itself a great deal. But when did Calcutta University, Madras University, Bombay, Delhi, you name it, have produced one paper of some international class that we as Indians feel that we should go and refer it? So that is the saddest part. And once you cure that, and why is it that we are not done? It is not that we can't write. Why is it our own students who go abroad write such wonderful theses? Why is it that they can't sit down here and write it? What is it that is lacking? The HR and HRD ministry. I am sorry to say this, the HRD ministry is our biggest Achilles heel. It is unable to conjure ways that would satiate the demands of the modern economy and the modern Indian mindset. We won't have knowledge. We want recognition for the knowledge. International standard is to have recognition for the knowledge. Now I write and say, let us assume that I write a standard on accounting. Now, who is there to say that this is a standard that is accepted in, say, the world of finance? It has to be the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. But the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India takes pride in cutting and pasting, copy pasting from the international standards touted by somebody, without realizing where is this International Financial Board, where is it located, what is it doing, who are the owners of such a board. Nobody worries as long as it comes from any country which is a Gora country, a white country. We are so happy to adopt the standard, and that is what is killing us. That colonial mindset, the mindset of accepting that the Westerner is right, and that needs to be adopted. We don't have to labor. So there is a two-pronged challenge. The challenge is that the process itself is doubtful. The process is a very big problem. The mindset is another problem.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that beautifully sums up our discussion, that idea of decolonization, of finding ourselves, because it is at that level that we need to grow into ourselves. We need to find ourselves and move forward as a confident, as a realized nation, as a people who have had a glorious heritage, who have had so much in terms of civilizational legacy to bank upon. And yet we need to move forward into the future, to sustainable future as such. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. It was a wonderful discussion with you. And we look forward to having you again on the channel. And thank you all for listening. Namaskar.
Namaskar.